Hi there, this is Kevin Patton with a brief audio introduction to episode number 39 of the A&P Professor podcast, also known as TAPP Radio, an audio circus and menagerie for teachers of human anatomy and physiology. In episode number 39, we're going to be looking at the function of the cerebellum, how the liver responds to the sight of food, exercise's effect on body weight, and our featured topic is the language of muscles, a strategy for learning. I just wanted to take a brief moment to mention something about my two websites, the ampprofessor.org for teachers of human anatomy and physiology, the home base of this podcast, and lionden.com, a separate website aimed mainly at A&P students. Well, I'm sorry to say that both websites have been hiccuping a bit lately. You know, the odd error message here and there and annoying stuff like that. There are a few technical reasons for that, which I'm working on fixing, but it's going to take some time. So we're going to keep seeing hiccups for a while. And I just wanted to apologize for that and assure you that I really am working on it. If there's something that's so messed up that you can't use it, then let me know exactly what's wrong and exactly where you found it, and I'll put that on the top of the list I'm working through. Thanks for your understanding. The free distribution of this podcast is sponsored by the Master of Science in Human Anatomy and Physiology Instruction, the HAPI or HAPPY degree. Looking to power up your game in teaching A&P? Or do you have colleagues that could benefit from more training? Check out this online graduate program at nycc.edu/happy, that's HAPI, or just click the link in the show notes or episode page. Well, it's time once again for some word dissections, and we have a few, so let's get started. The first one is an easy one. That's always a good place to start, right? With the easy one, and that is cerebellum. That's a term we're all familiar with, and probably many of us already know what it means in terms of its literal translation, but let's break it down. The first part of cerebellum, the cerebe part, comes from the Latin word cerebrum, which literally means brain. Now, I know in anatomy, cerebrum is a particular part of the brain, but what the word cerebrum means in the original Latin is brain. The -lum ending then modifies the word brain to emphasize that it's a small thing. So -lum means a small thing. So when you put it all together, cerebellum means a small brain. And that makes sense, right? The very early anatomists who didn't know much of anything about the inside of our body, when they first start looking at brains, they noticed that there was this big, huge thing in mammalian brains, at least, that they just called the brain, not realizing that there were some extra parts that they weren't really considering as part of the brain. And then they saw this like little miniature version of it right next to it, right under, behind, posterior, or whatever too. And so they called that the little brain. So we have the brain and the little brain. So that's how it originated. Our next term is another very common term, and that is muscle. We all know muscle. I mean, you don't need to be in the field of anatomy or physiology to know what muscle is. All of us know what that is. But what does it mean literally? Well, it is a term that goes back, way back to the original Latin, where it's rendered as musculus. So muscle is the English or anglicized form of the Latin word musculus, musculus. Plural would be musculi with an I ending, or musculi, some people say. So we'll break that down. The mus part at the beginning means mouse, literally. It's from the word that means mouse. The CLE ending in the English form of the word, or the CULUS ending if you're looking at the Latin form of the word, that ending means little. So when you put mus together with CLE at the end, that means little mouse. So our muscles are literally little mice. Now, as I mentioned, this goes way, way, way back to ancient times in the Latin language. This isn't some recent thing that anatomists or physiologists came up with. This is an ordinary language term, muscle. And we don't know exactly how it originated, but I can just imagine sitting around with maybe some little kids, and they're learning the language and so on. And the little toddlers watching their mom or dad do some chores and stuff and taking care of the kids. And here's this little voice that says, "Mommy, Daddy, what are those little things under your skin moving around?" And you can imagine some cheerful parent turning around saying, "Oh, those are little mice." And that would have made some sense probably to those kids because, they would have seen mice around in their household and outside the household, maybe underneath some cloth, maybe in a sack of grain or something like that. And so what I often do with my students is when I introduce that term, I do explain the literal meaning of it because I think it's kind of fun. And I tell them, okay, look at your forearm. Roll up your sleeve if you have to. Now, move your fingers around, flex them toward the palm and then extend them back again and so on. Start moving them all around, maybe independently of one another. And look at your forearm. And you see all of those muscles that you're using to move your phalanges around? Those are muscles, but don't they kind of look like they could be little mice inside a sack of grain? It's kind of a fun way to start out with muscles because studying muscles can be very intimidating. So let's play around a little bit in our storytelling and tell that little story. It's an idea. Related to that is our next term, and that is tendon. And a lot of us use that term a lot, right? Well, I mean, we kind of have to use that term as A&P teachers. And we know that what the tendon is that dense fibrous connecting unit in a muscle organ that is going to connect that muscle to a bone usually, or some other structure, like maybe another muscle. And it literally means, if we look at the tend part, it means pulled tight. It's actually the basis for our ordinary English word tension. So tend means tension or something pulled tight. The ON ending means unit. So a tendon is a unit that is involved in tension. And that makes sense, right? Because that is what the tendon does. I mean, that's why it's made of dense fibrous tissue, isn't it? It's to help, maintain that tension and not be injured when it's under tension. In life, tendons are always under tension, aren't they? I mean, we kind of think of the increased tension that tendons experience when we're doing work with a muscle, when we're doing muscle contraction. Whether it's isotonic or isometric contraction, doesn't matter. There's going to be tension in those tendons. But think about when the muscles are so-called relaxed. They're not really truly relaxed, right? There's a certain amount of muscle tone. So there's still some tension there. If there wasn't, then we would just fall down. We'd just be like a sack of bones falling to the ground. So yeah, there's always tension in those tendons. So the meaning of that word can kind of help us understand the role of tendons in the body. At least I think. It helps me. Even if it helps no one else, it helps me, and I'm telling you about it. Our last term is a term I just used a moment ago, and that is the term anglicize. And I'm going to use that again in the full episode coming up here, episode 39. Anglicize is based on the Latin word for English, Anglic. Anglic means English. And then you add the ISE or IZE ending to a word. What that does is it converts a noun into a verb in the sense of rendering that noun into something. You're making it whatever it is that noun root is. So if you're making something English, you're anglicizing it, you're Englishizing it, if you want to put it that way. So we do that a lot in scientific terminology that we use in A&P, right? We're converting Latin words into an English form. As a matter of fact, a lot of those words are in fact converted into Latin. So they were Latinized Greek words, for example. So you have a Latinized Greek word, and now it's in the Latin form. Now we're taking the Latin form and we're anglicizing it, and we're putting it into an English form. And we do that a lot with muscle names and other kinds of anatomical structures and even some physiological terms as well. So that's it for our word dissections for this preview. This podcast is sponsored by HAPs, the Human Anatomy and Physiology Society, promoting excellence in the teaching of human anatomy and physiology for over 30 years. Go visit HAPs at theapprofessor.org/HAPS. That's HAPS. And don't forget, the annual conference is coming up soon. Of course I do. Of course I have a recommendation for the A&P Professor Book Club in this preview. And what it is this time is a book called The Gift of Pain by Paul Brand with Philip Yancey. It was originally titled The Gift Nobody Wants, and that kind of gives you a hint as the message that is behind that title of The Gift of Pain. That's kind of an odd way of thinking of pain. And this book has been out there a long time, but it's one of my favorite books related to my understanding of human anatomy and physiology and my teaching of human anatomy and physiology. So I wanted to share it with you. It goes all the way back to 1933. Holy smoke. No, it's not that old. It goes back to 1993. I read it in 1995. It was that year that I was the host of the HAPS annual conference in St. Louis. And in those days, we used to have a keynote speaker. And I was looking around. I wanted to have the best keynote speaker yet at my conference. So I started asking around. And my friend John Martin, longtime HAPS member, had just recently heard Paul Brand, the author of this book, give a presentation. And he said, this guy is fantastic. He's going to really engage your audience. He's going to really give a message that is very useful and meaningful for A&P teachers. And so I said, sounds good to me. And so I got a copy of the book and I started reading it. And I thought, yep, John was right. This is a great message. And so I called up Paul Brand and he said, I would love to do this. That sounds like a great audience for my message, but it's just impossible for me on those dates to make it, into St. Louis and do this. So I'm sorry. And I'm sorry too, because I think that would have been a great presentation. And so what is this book about? Well, can you imagine life without pain? Well, if you're a physician working in a colony for leprosy patients where people literally feel no pain, you can see the horrifying consequences of feeling no pain. It's really life-threatening when that happens. That's Paul Brand. That was his life. This is basically a memoir of at least one aspect of his life. And Paul Brand was a physician, a clinical researcher, who grew up in a family of medical missionaries and later became a medical missionary himself. He was a British citizen. His whole family were British originally, living in India. And this memoir is kind of focused on his work with pain. And it kind of starts out with his moving as a young man from India, away from his family, and going to London, where the family was originally from, in order to go to medical school. And this was during World War II. And in his medical school in London, a lot of his time as an intern was spent in the wards treating the injured airmen that were defending Great Britain during World War II. Something that he noticed right away is in this big ward where there was just one cot after another of these injured airmen, that he would notice that on one cot there would be a patient with pretty minor injuries who would be screaming and yelling and crying about the pain. And then in the next bed would be someone with much more severe injuries who should be in a lot more pain than that first patient, but didn't seem to really be experiencing as much pain, and might even say to him, no, treat that other guy. He's in more pain. Attend to him first and then get to me. And that just puzzled him that, the seriousness of the injury did not indicate the strength of pain that was experienced by the individual patient. So, being a good intern, he asked his supervising physicians, and they all told him to go away and get to work because, as he discovered, there was no answer for that. He wouldn't take that for an answer or take no answer for an answer. So he dedicated the rest of his life to trying to understand pain. And when he went back to India to become a medical missionary, he worked with leprosy patients. In leprosy, there's nerve damage that causes you to not feel pain, at least in parts of your body. And of course, it depends on how severe your disease is. And he discovered that without pain, you're in serious, serious trouble because pain is supposed to be annoying, just like an alarm bell, because that's what it is. It's a physiological alarm bell that is telling us something is wrong, and maybe even specifically where it's wrong, so we can maybe avoid further injury by removing ourselves from whatever is causing that pain. And as healing occurs, as the healing process occurs, that pain is going to keep reminding us like, you got a damaged part here. It's healing. Don't use it too vigorously because that's going to disrupt the healing process here. Let's take care of this part. And then that pain gradually subsides as more and more healing takes place. Now, of course, there are many other kinds of scenarios where we feel pain, but it's all kind of related to that function. And sometimes it's a dysfunction. Sometimes our body is causing us to experience pain because there's some damage or some dysfunction in that alarm system, but it's supposed to be a working, helpful alarm system. We're supposed to hate pain. It's supposed to constantly pull our attention away from things that we want to be paying attention to because it's telling us about an injury that needs to be paid attention to, that we shouldn't be ignoring at that moment. So it gets all into this, how we perceive pain, and maybe we should value pain as a gift rather than just as an annoyance. Just like we should be thankful that we have fire alarms and other, severe weather alarms and things like that, because even though they're annoying and we don't have to want to deal with them when they go off, it's a good thing we have them, right? But the other thing that really is woven throughout this book is he talks a lot about the humanity of all patients, whether they're feeling pain or not feeling pain or feeling different levels of pain. And he talks about how important it is to maintain our own humanity as we care for others. That is our empathy and compassion. So it's really a very well told story. And I would like every caregiver who ever takes care of me or ever will take care of me to have read this book. And for that reason, I have in the past offered this as a reading assignment to my students in various ways in different courses and so on, because I think it's important for people preparing to go into health careers that they have heard stories like this. And here's one of them. So go to the episode page or the show notes, and I'll have a link to that book if you want to get a copy of it. And you should be able to get an almost free copy these days. It's such an old book. And I really highly recommend it. And I'd love to hear your response. If you do read it or you've read it before, call into the podcast hotline or drop me an email because I'd like to hear your feedback about that. I mean, that's what makes it a book club, right? It's a club if we kind of start interacting with each other and sharing our thoughts and feelings about reading these books. A searchable transcript and a captioned audiogram of this preview episode are funded by AAA, the American Association of Anatomists, at anatomy.org. Well, this is Kevin Patton signing off for now and reminding you to keep your questions and comments coming. Why not call the podcast hotline right now at 1-833-LION-DONE. That's 1-833-546-6336. Or visit us at theapprofessor.org. I'll see you down the road.